thing on? Okay. Universities, prisons, hospitals, you name it. Dr. Schechner's approach to performance studies has influenced, I was going to say a generation, but I think we're now at a point that it's generations of students and colleagues who have gone limited to Dionysus in '69, Commune, The Tooth of Crime, Mother Courage and Her Children, Seneca's Oedipus, Faust's Gastronomy, Three Sisters, Hamlet, The Oresteia, Jocastus, Swimming to Spalding, and Imagining O. Dr. Schechner's books have been translated into 16 different languages and have become the core. Often, dictionaries will be available for signing in the lobby following this talk. Aside from being a prolific performance maker and writer, Dr. Schechner has also taught and lectured at numerous universities throughout the world. He initially served as an assistant professor and then associate professor of theater at Tulane University before returning to the East Coast to New York University's School of the Arts to become a professor of drama. His title was changed from professor of performance studies when the graduate drama program was renamed to reflect its shift in focus from drama to performance as its primary object of analysis. He was then promoted to university professor in 1991 and now serves as professor emeritus and continues to advise performance studies scholars and practitioners. And in fact, he is right now advising a doctoral student. Perhaps, though, most importantly has been Dr. Schechner's continued leadership as he has edited the scholarly journal TDR, the Drama Review, which he edited from 1962 until 1967. He then stopped for 17 years and resumed the editorship in 1985 and continues to edit TDR today. Schechner then took a very small, quality-focused academic journal and transformed it into the vanguard of new currents and trends in performance scholarship by radically broadening its focus from primarily European and North American theater to one that is international, diverse, and inclusive in scope. And TDR covers a wide variety of performance genres in addition to theater. And one of the 4 issues every year is edited by a consortium editor from either Brown University, Shanghai Theater Academy, Stanford University, or Yale University. There is also a Chinese language edition of TDR available. His professional awards are too numerous to name here, but they include 3 honorary doctorates, grants and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Fulbright Program, the American Council of Learned Societies, and several Lifetime Achievement Awards. So please join me in welcoming to Texas A&M University, Dr. Richard Schechner.
I guess I should say howdy, right? A little more enthusiasm. Howdy! Okay. So I'm going to try to do something I haven't done before. That is to try to link together my work as an artist, a theater director, my work as a kind of performance anthropologist, my field work in various cultures, and my scholarly writing. Up till now, I've kind of kept these in a silo, each one, and prided myself as keeping them separate. Actually, coming here has helped break that down a little bit. I mean, I see some of the students that I worked with yesterday morning in a practical workshop, and I see some people I saw this morning in a scholarly kind of endeavor. I want to thank Marty, and I want to thank Zachary, and I want to thank the entire set of people here in the Performance Studies Department, the faculty and the administrators for bringing me here to make this experiment. Now, for those of you who know something about performance studies, some of what I'm going to be saying will be very familiar. Of course, twice behaved behavior, rituals, never for the first time, but for the second to the nth time, is my stock and trade. And there's nothing wrong with repeating if that repetition also has a kind of new flavor about it. So let's see where we're going to go. And I have notes, and some stuff I'm going to read and some stuff I'm going to play with. And I'm going to also show you some slides and a couple of video clips. But it's pretty hard to compress 65 years into 45 minutes, unless I'm being cremated, and that will come later. So takes about that long. Now, what are the connections among my artistic work, performance theory, and the development of performance studies? For me, the evolution of performance studies is both a personal journey and an academic, scholarly, artistic development, something I instigated and something that was already well underway in allied fields, something closely knitted into my life experiences, my work as a theater director and a composer of theatrical events, and something always already there, waiting to be codified. Additionally, and crucially, performance studies was from the start intercultural and interdisciplinary. And I'm going to break occasionally, and I'll probably go on too long because things lead to things. I was thinking where I got that word intercultural, and I remember now exactly where I got it because I found it in Texas. I was in the Army between 1958 and 1960, and for the last year of that, 59 and 60, I was at Fort Hood in Killeen. I don't recommend you go there for a weekend. And so on one of my breaks, I took myself down to Austin, which was a pretty hot town at that point, and it's certainly better to be in than Killeen, and on a leave. And I went to the University of Texas. I wanted to visit people. Remember, I was, at this point, 25 years old. I wasn't who I am now. I didn't really know anybody, but I was wandering around University of Texas, and I came upon a window. I still see it in my mind. I don't know. It said intercultural studies, or intercultural something or other. That word really got to me because I had heard international but not intercultural. And it was kind of like a predictive word, so I took it. And I've used it ever since. This is the first time I've acknowledged that it was Texas-born. Now, what are performance and performance studies theoretically? One way to parse existence is to distinguish, and this, if you've read some of my books, some of this stuff you'll know and some you won't, to distinguish between being, doing, showing doing, and explaining showing doing. So being, it's an ontological term, is existence itself. Being is the activity of all that is. Being is existence itself, all that is. Doing is the all that is. Today, a very important landmark was made in astronomy when they showed the photograph of the first black hole, but it's a perfect performance studies thing because they're showing a photograph of nothing, of a deeply profound nothing which sucks everything into it. So its doing is the canceling of all doing, and the photograph obviously has to be fake news. But fake news on the ontological level. I mean, I think it's a real photograph of nothing. And it's a kind of an interesting paradox, because in performance studies, we're living constantly on the edge of paradox. All right, so doing is the activity of all that is, from quarks to black holes to viruses to sentient beings to supergalactic strings. So that's what doing is. Now, showing doing is pointing to, underlining, and displaying doing. So you laughed when I talked about black holes being nothing. So that was showing a doing, right? A doing about a being. So already we were involved in a kind of performance studies enterprise. And now I'm explaining showing doing, which is performance studies. So there you have it. We can go home, right? Being, doing, showing doing, explaining showing doing. Very simple, but of course it takes an innumerable number of lifetimes to get to the end of that chain. Now, performing takes place both in doing and in showing doing because it eats its own tail. So in showing doing, I'm also doing. So I'm doing and I'm showing doing at the same time, and then you can get into one of these positive feedback loops and go, you know, which is when too much information gets crammed into too little space between your ears. The more clearly you show what you are doing, the more obviously you are performing. Now, performing varies according to circumstances. And performing takes place in business, in sports, in sex. And think of all the times when you read a blog, or if you read a newspaper or something, see the number of times performance is used. And it's used both in a positive vector and a negative vector. You performed very well. You did it very well. Or you're just performing. So how do we tell the difference between you're just performing, like it's false, it's phony, you're putting it on, and you really performed well? Well, you need to know the context. You need to find the matrix in which the action is devised. But performing is one of those really trickster words that can be everything from positive to negative, not like justice. Justice, you know, is a very, very good word. It means justice. It doesn't have a bad side to it. You know, atrocity is the other. It's a word that doesn't have a good side to it. But performing and performance has a bad side and a good side. It slips all over the place. That's why performers have long been distrusted. Because performers, whether you're artistic performers or other kinds of performers, are slippery beings. And we have to be careful with them. And we have to be careful with our discipline, because the discipline itself is a slippery discipline. So we know that performing takes place in the arts, putting on a show, a play, a dance, a concert, in everyday life. Performance is underlining an action, showing it off. People in the 21st century, you, especially the younger of you, are enabled, empowered, and driven by social media and vast digital resources, live by means of performing. You know, if you have a smartphone, if you use it, if you, get input from multiple sources, you're living by means of performing. So it's real, it's here. Now, I want to show, I want to turn on the slides. Please, let's just show the first slide, please. So this is the broad spectrum of performing. So there are many, many genres, and we can look at them in a different way. So one way, performance is a continuum with ritual and play at opposite ends. I know the writing is very small. So there's play, and there's ritual. And so it's a spectrum: play, games, sports, popular entertainments, arts, daily life, and ritual. So these things blend into each other. So one way to look at performance studies is this kind of continuum. But there's another way as well, and that is to put play and ritual, which are kind of identical twins. They're like Siamese twins, play and ritual. So the same thing can be play, can be ritual. You go, I see your great, huge football stadium, so when you go to see these games, A&M playing, you're seeing a sport, but you're also seeing a ritual. It's repetitious. You know what to expect. You're happy or sad about the outcome, because that's not known, because the kind of ritual, which is a game, has a known set of rules, but not a known outcome. Some games are fixed if it's professional wrestling and so on. So play and ritual are dancing partners. So you can also think of performance as a continuum with play and ritual underlying and permeating the other kinds of performances. So play and ritual underlie games, underlie sports, underlie popular entertainments, underlie the arts, and underlie daily life. Now, I don't have time in a short lecture like this to go in and give examples of all this, because I want to also turn to some of the places I've been and read a little bit from my notebooks. But that's one very good way to analyze performance, to say, how is this performance a ritual? And then say, how is this performance play? So you go to church. Let's say some of you are Roman Catholics, and you're going to go and you're taking communion. So obviously you say it's ritual. But ask the next time you go to church, when the communion is going on, how is it play? What makes it playful? I'm not going to give you the answer to that, but in answering that, you'll find that there are many ways in which it's play. And in that sense, you'll see the theatrical side of the Holy Communion, even if you believe it. Because there is, my friend Victor Turner, and I'll talk a little bit about him, a great anthropologist, said, make-believe and make-belief are together. Do enough make-believe very powerfully, and you'll get to make-belief. You'll make belief. Of course, in the theater, we know that. Sometimes we get carried away with our roles, where the make-believe, you really are deeply invested in what you're doing. So the make-believe is the play part. The make-believe is the ritual part. But don't think of these things, even though we put them up in writing and in books as separate categories, think of them as things that permeate itself. You know, we're a very visually oriented culture, Western culture, particularly from the Greeks. The word theater is from the word theatron, to see. But think of performance theory as something you smell and taste as much as see. And smell and taste permeate. You know, if I want to focus on you, you know, the eye focuses, the ear a little less. You have to train the ear to focus. But the nose hardly at all. In other words, it'll diffuse itself. I can't shine a spotlight of scent, right? So, but each of these senses, you know, has its place. So, performance studies is to some degree performance smell. It's a stinky discipline. Now, many different functions of performance. Let's see the next. Oh, I can do it, right. So, in my most recent book, Performance Studies an Introduction, a new edition comes out this fall, I do this both as a fan and as a web. I didn't put the web one up because the slide didn't come out very well. But as a fan, you see rites and ceremonies, shamanism, the eruption and resolution of crisis, performance in everyday life, sports and entertainments, play, the art-making process, and ritualization. So all of this is another way to see performance. So what I urge you to do as you study it is to not say, this is what it is. I'm finished now. I saw Schechner's continuum. That's it. It's also a fan. Oh, I get it. It's a fan. It's really nicely organized. But you could put these, and they have a lot of connections among them, so it's like a spider's web. So again, one of the things I want to emphasize to you is to take your studies, take performance, and apply different methodologies to it. You know, different rehearsals, as it were. And at the end of my talk, I'm going to talk about restoration of behavior and how rehearsal is a real model for life and for understanding life. Okay. Interculturally, many cultures and universality. So much, it's not so much that it's a tension between many cultures and universality, as much as exploring where and how cultures meet, how they interact, how they conflict. Yes, there are deep similarities, not so much of practices, but of functions, of what performances do. So here's the things that performances do, according to me. Again, I don't present my stuff as the be and all and end all. It's lovely to get introduced because you feel that you're attending the ceremony after your own funeral, and and you're being honored in a lovely way. But at the same time, you know, the Roman emperors had somebody whispering in their ears, "You're only human," and so somebody has to whisper in any authority you meet, "You're only human." So I'm proposing this. I think it's right, but some of you will revise it and move it in a different direction. So to deal with the divine and the demonic, to heal, to make or change identity, to foster community, to create beauty, to teach or persuade, to entertain. So those are what I think are the functions of performance. So, you know, and an artwork will maybe emphasize to create beauty and to entertain. Maybe a class will emphasize to teach or persuade. An exorcism would be to deal with the divine and to heal. An initiation rite would be to change identity. A community theater, you know, different kinds of things like what Augusto Boal does is to foster community. And also, I think many performances have these multiple functions. And they also change. Think of it, again, if you want to use taste as well as smell, think of it as a meal. So the appetizer is doing something different than the soup, then the main course is doing something different than the dessert, doing something different than the beverage. So these functions that you slip in and out of them in terms of different kinds of performances. Now my journeys, especially in Asia since 1971, have impacted my theories. Now this is where I'm going off. So far up till now, it's a kind of a standard, you know, I've done it before. But now I'm going off into something else. I'm going to try to relate some of what I have done in my life to what I think about. These trips did not so much affect my theater making as confirmed tendencies I already had. Over the years, I have vehemently directed, workshopped in many parts of the world, on every continent, in fact, except Antarctica. And with global warming, maybe I'll get there. I have directed plays in Hindi in India, in Mandarin in China and Taiwan, in English in South Africa, and brought productions from New York to India, France, Romania, and Canada. Now, I'll show you that in a minute. Now, you might ask, how do you direct plays in languages you don't really know? I'm not fluent in Mandarin. I can say a few words. I'm not fluent in Hindi. I can say a few words. It's because I don't think of theater as simply the film clip. And before we do the film clip, I want to say what it is. So the film clip is a short film clip, and it's going to start with Dionysus in '69. You'll see the whole clip is 3 minutes, so these are going to go very, very fast. So we're going to go to Dionysus in '69, and then I believe we're going to go to Three Sisters, and when we get to after Dionysus, I'm going to say stop. I'm going to say a little bit about Three Sisters. So that's my heartbeat whenever I'm relying on something technical. It did run right. No, stop. I had in 33 Worcester Street in New York. Now this is going to be a short clip from Sam Shepard's Tooth of Crime. Now Sam, do any of you know who Sam Shepard is? He was an actor, a filmmaker, and early in his... By the way, the movie of Dionysus in '69 was made by Brian De Palma. So I worked with a lot of these people who became pretty well known as they grew up. And so this is Sam Shepard. And this happens to be Elizabeth LeCompte, who is now the director of the Worcester Group. And this is just a short song from The Tooth of Crime, and which is Sam Shepard. And if I were to work like we did our workshop yesterday in the black box, I very rarely work in a space like this, because I don't want the audience to be seated. It kind of is a kind of semi-fetal position. It gets you to relax, you withdraw. I like the audience to be able to get up and to move around and to share the space with the performers for the most part. So this will be a very short clip of Tooth of Crime. Please.
The way things are. Everybody's doing time. For everybody else's crime.
Stop. Okay. So in the Tooth of Crime, people could move around the outside of the space. They could move in close to the performers. It's a play about a star, a rock star. So they could get close to him. They could get his autograph and so on. He was played by Spalding Gray. And it related to some of the things I'm going to show after I show these clips, some of the things I saw in Papua New Guinea. And I'll say how that influenced my artistic work. Now this next is Anton Chekhov's Three Sisters. And this is the second act. And I did each act in a different style. And it was done on a proscenium stage. You can see spectators there. And so it was a standard staging in that sense, with a lot of music. I used a lot of music in my productions. So the first act was done as I thought Stanislavski might have done it, as realism. The second act, what you're going to see a little scene from, is how Meyerholt, who was a revolutionary director, might have done it with biomechanics and so on. The third act and the fourth act you're not going to see, but the third act I did as if it were performed as a melodrama done in a gulag, a camp in Siberia, where the people are performing Chekhov as a memory of the Moscow they've been exiled from. And the last act is a radio play. So each act was a different style. Each act took place at a different period of time. 1903, when the play first premiered. 1923, which is this act. 1953, in the Gulag and the present day. So let's watch this little clip from Chekhov's, because it's very unusual. Okay, stop. So that's Chekhov. What we're going to see now is a short clip from the Aeschylus's Oresteia. Now, this shows some of the breadth of the kind of thing I do. And when I said it influenced from the word intercultural and the movement around the world, I'm deeply committed to doing performances of different cultures, in different cultures. So now this is the Oresteia in Taipei, where I supervised the building of an outdoor theater, like a Greek theater, on a hillside for 2,900 people to come see this. You'll see a little bit of the full thing. And it's done in the singing style of Jingju, Beijing opera, Chinese opera. But in the costuming, it was a kind of our own vision of the kind of Greek costuming. And this is a very famous classical Chinese actor who had never done this kind of thing before. I mean, had never put himself in the hands of a Western director. And our collaboration was I wanted him to do his style of singing and movement. So let's watch a little bit of, this is Agamemnon returning from the war, and Clytemnestra, you'll see her greeting him, and he's about to walk down the purple carpet to come into the palace, and she will give him a bath to wash off the war and murder him in his bath. But we're just going to see his arrival, and he's going to show his foot, because he's going to say, I don't put my dirty foot on this purple cloth. And she says, please do. And so let's watch and listen to the music in this one, please. These are all spectators around. They're the spectators. So you see spectators up the hill and then down to the stage. Clytemnestra. Stop. So this next one, just some stills from a piece called Swimming to Spalding. Now, Spalding Gray, do any of you know who Spalding Gray was? Spalding Gray was a performer. He was best known for his monologues. He also was in The Killing Fields, the movie The Killing Fields, and he did a piece called Swimming to Cambodia about his work on that film. But before that, he worked with me very intimately for 10 years. And I was there and helping him when he did his first monologue, Sex and Death, into the age of 13. At any rate, this woman, Leon Amaris, her name is, you'll see some slides of her. She said she wanted to do a piece with me, a solo piece. What should she do? And she was interested in Spalding Gray. So I said, you go to Thailand and take the same trip he took, which was to the sex clubs of Thailand, and write your account of it. And it was called Swimming to Spalding. And she did. It's a very interesting piece, because what she came back with was, at first she was there and she went into the sex club and she actually hired a young prostitute. But instead of taking her back to the hotel, the young woman, to have sex with her, she took her back and then gave her some money and said, go, you have the night off. And the woman was hurt. She said, "What's the matter? Am I not good?" You know, and she had to explain, "No, I'm giving you your freedom, at least for this one night." And then she goes on in this piece to talk about how she had a relationship with a soldier in Iraq who killed a family, and how that, and he describes how he killed the family, and then another soldier who was in Kosovo and Afghanistan. So the piece gets very, very dark. We can't, I do have a video of it, and I can send it to you guys if you want to see it, but here's some visuals of it. Yes? Okay, stop. Now, this is just one slide from another piece. You see there's an actor here, and there's another actor here. This is a hyper-real piece called Cops, in which I did a show in which I built a diner next to the performing garage. I actually took a real diner that was going out of business and bought it, and made a diner and had a working stove and everything, and did a melodrama about a gunfight in this place. And the interesting thing about it is that, again, the range of styles, from hyper-realism, which this is, to something like the Art of Style, which is highly stylized. So that is, in my view, my artistic version of interculturalism. In other words, rather than sticking with one style, rather than insisting on consistency, I like to move in different directions. Okay, let's go, please. Okay, stop. You're going to see a little bit more. This is the most recent production. It's called Imagining O, and it ends, as you can see, in the water, because O means water in French, and it takes Ophelia and her drowning and combines it with the personal lives of the actors I was working with, and a French erotic novel called Story of O, L'Histoire d'Eau. And so O stands for water, it stands for Ophelia drowning. And what I did in this one, I decided to work only with women. And I took all of the male lines out of Hamlet. We only performed the women's lines. It was fabulous. So you never heard Hamlet, you never heard Claudius, you never heard Polonius. You only heard Ophelia and Gertrude. And we did the play that way. And it's really interesting because it reveals the underlying gender politics of the play. Yes, my lord. No, my lord. I thought so, my lord. You know, what Ophelia has to say until she goes nuts and is giving out flowers, is about to drown herself. It's very powerful. But at the end, all of my Ophelias jumped into the water, and they had to go back again and again and again, starting happily, which you'll see. You don't see the end until they drown, and all you see are their white shirts floating on the water at the end of the play. So let's run this, please. Okay, stop. So that play, Imagining O, took place in 11 different locations around the theater in Montclair, New Jersey, part of peak performances. So the audience, in certain places, like at this scene, they were all together, but in many times they were off in different ways. Again, affected by my field work, my anthropological work, where you sometimes follow things, and you go off into the bush, off into the woods, and you don't see everything. And you learn that in life, and I try to bring this into artistic life, you can't be comprehensive. And one of the things that conventional theater does is pretend to be comprehensive. In a space like this, you see everything, but you don't see everything. So in some of my work, I actually break it up. So a spectator, you are going to go in this direction, and he is going to go in that direction, and there's no way that you can see what he's going to see or he's going to see what you're going to see unless you come back 11 times, which very few, nobody I know did that. But there are certain places where they're all together. Again, I have videos of these, and I'd be very glad to make them available to you if you wanted to see them. Now, this is Hamlet in China. Before Imagining O. I've done Hamlet 3 times. I've done a Hamlet in New York, and there I had an African-American play Hamlet, because I think that the dramaturgical problem with Hamlet is why is he not king? What is it that makes him not become king when his father dies? He's 30 years old, 29. We know that from internal evidence in the play. He's college educated. He goes to Wittenberg. So why isn't he made king? Why does Claudius become? Because somehow he's an outsider. Somehow he's not fit. So when I did it first in New York, I cast an African American. Not that African Americans are not fit, but within the framework of the play, within the framework of racist United States, it was before Obama was elected, I felt that this would separate him out. Without anybody saying, oh, you're a black man, or anything of that sort. It just was, he didn't fit in the production. And that, so rather than, as very often when you do racial blind casting or gender blind casting, you try to make everybody fit. It's the same. But when I do interculturalism, I want to show how it's abrasive, how it doesn't fit, how it kind of applies a scalpel to the society. So that's the first one. Second one, this one, I had Hamlet as gay. I thought that would be the way, because it's an all-Chinese cast, that I would show he's on the outsider. So the very first scene is Hamlet and Horatio having a long, long kiss on stage, which to the Chinese audience was quite surprising, if not shocking. Of course, to Shakespeare buffs, it says, what's going on here? But Horatio I had as Hamlet's chronicler, because at the end of the play, Horatio wants to commit suicide, and Hamlet says, absent thee from felicity a while and tell my story. So Horatio follows him around, follows Hamlet around, writes down the whole story, and they're lovers throughout the play. And so, and they're in with a kind of love circle with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So that's how I had Hamlet as an outsider in this. This particular scene is Ophelia with the blood of her father, because she is unhappy in this interpretation, not because of Hamlet rejecting her, that's been going on, but because her father has been killed by Hamlet. So the man she wanted to marry has killed the man she's most closely involved with. I did another performance production of Hamlet, which I don't have pictures of, in which, well, no, the one in New York, not only was Hamlet an African American, but Polonius and Ophelia were in an incestuous relationship. So she really, an overt incestuous relationship. So she really gets destroyed when he gets killed. So this is, and now here's a camera person. You don't see it in the film, in this slide, and this little film clip. He's following her around, and on the sides of the stage are huge screens. So there are lots of close-ups of the actors during the play. And the camera people were always visible. Okay, let's run this little clip, please. So it's Gertrude speaking. So they're speaking Mandarin. All right, this is Mother Courage. Stop for a moment. So I did Mother Courage and Her Children by Brecht, and I did it both in India and in the United States. And of course, if you know the play, it has a wagon, but I decided to do it without a wagon, being contrary, to see what I could do without a wagon. So this is the third scene. And Mother Courage is a kind of suburban American housewife, but it's cast in, it's set in a kind of no particular period. But you can see, I wanted to show this picture, you can see the spectators all around and how it's going. And here's the Mother Courage's store. Okay, let it run, please. And there's when she finds out that her son, Swiss Cheese, has been killed. There he is. He's dressed in a Boy Scout uniform. Okay, this is the Maryland Project. Stop. So this is a play about Marilyn Monroe, and what I did was, could you? Well, you couldn't see. You can see it here. It's two productions of the play running side by side. mirror images of each other. Because of time, I think we should just go forward, please. And this will probably be the last one. Okay, so that's it. Now I want to show my slides, a couple of slides, please. All right, so quickly now, these are some of the other productions. This is the cherry orchard in India, and so that we built this whole house, and it took place in the house and in an orchard we actually planted. We planted several hundred trees, and so some of it took place outside, and some of it took place in this house which we built. This is Tomorrow He'll Be Out of the Mountains. It was the last political play, still to this day, done in China. It was done during the Tiananmen Square time, 1989. It had to do with the Red Guard and the Little Red Book, and it ran for 17 performances, and then it was closed, and even till now, a play with that amount of political content has not been allowed in China. This is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is August Wilson, and it was done in the Grahamstown Festival in South Africa, and it was done at the moments near the end of apartheid in the mid-1980s, when Mandela was still imprisoned and they were negotiating, and I had a special dispensation on the one side from August Wilson, who allowed me to direct his play. He didn't often let non-African Americans direct his plays, but it's a whole other story, but I have a history I'll tell a little bit about it in the freedom movement, and also by the African National Congress. So I brought the play, and so here's the recording studio. There's the audiences all around in a gym, and here's the rehearsal thing. So again, this use of unusual kinds of staging. Now this is the same Hamlet that you saw the picture of. This is right before Polonius is going to be killed. This is Polonius, this is Ophelia, this is Gertrude, and this is literally the closet scene. They're in there with the clothes hanging, and then you can see spectators out here trying to peer in, and here's the camera person. You can see the wires, and he's filming it, and they can see, those who can't see can see it that way. All right, now we're moving totally different. So now we're going to the Sepik River in Papua New Guinea, and this is a time when I was, my first deep trip outside of the European sphere was in 1971 and 72. And part of it took me to this place. This is a picture I took in the Sepik River of these people dancing. And I saw these people both in the Sepik, which are down below, and in the mountains. This is the Asaro, the mudmen of Asaro up in the highlands near Susaroka. I saw a kind of performance, the intensity of performance that I hadn't seen before. A kind of performance that was highly theatrical, obviously, but still a ritual at the same time. In a society where they didn't have any television or radio or anything of that sort. Papua New Guinea is now more connected, but at that point it was not connected. I had to get there by small plane and then jeep and then walk. And it was very, very far away, and it affected me. I also saw initiation rites where women passed the men between their legs to give a kind of symbol of joining the community, and I lifted that for Dionysus in '69. So this brought me to develop this theory of the relationship between efficacy and entertainment, between ritual and theater, rather than thinking of these two as separate, that, you know, the ritual goes for results and the theater is fun, linked to an absent other, only for those here now. A symbolic time, emphasis is now. Performer is possessed or entranced. Performer knows what she or he's doing. Audience participates, audience watches, audience believes, audience appreciates. Criticism discouraged, criticism flourishes. Collective creativity, individual creativity. Again, it's a continuum. And the theory I developed from this, what I saw in New Guinea, was more on this side, but it also had some of this. And then I started to realize all of our arts combine these two. So it's a question of what the mix is, at which moment, and how much efficacy is in entertainment, how much ritual is in entertainment, how much entertainment is in ritual, and so on. At the same time, I have just like Jim over there, Jim Ball, I have kept notebooks. I have 80,000 pages of notebooks. I'm not going to read them all, but I am going to read from March 1972 my reaction to this society, because I want you to hear this. And this is not edited. It's from then. Twice now, once after leaving Gumaz and Susaroka, that's where this is, and once while reading science fiction about the, quote, primitive, quote, people, I've gotten ill, severe anxiety, which takes the form of nausea, dizziness, disgust, and loss of contact with the outer world, as if I were about to pass out from lack of blood, shock, anger, or something basic biological like that. I know it is connected to very deep guilt and shame, to knowing that these people I admire and love and have done so for so long at a bookish distance and now up close are slated for extinction. Their way of life is like grass before thresher, and every day more is cut down. Worse, I know I'm an agent of this thresher in my own curious and eager way. I feel the responsibility for this cultural genocide and an utter helplessness in doing something about it. At lunch, talking with some young men who are trainees of the phone company, I thought of a possible answer, that after these people go, we still have learned enough from them to integrate their sense of personal relations, true human relations, into our sense of technology and medicine. But how utilitarian and cruel my hopes are. They grant that the villagers we've met will be swept away in confusion and terror, hardly knowing what happened to them. Their great gift, developed over centuries, lies in the directness of how they live in integrated lifestyles, peaking in human relations, communal living in the village, at the village level, and art, specifically ceremony, display, initiation, and warfare. Yes, their war, their payback scheme, is basically an art form. Its preparation and ceremonial aspects outweigh its economic and political consequences. For these people, war is an elaborate ritual that does not claim a great number of lives and rarely, if ever, destroys an entire village, was part of their social system and not the destruction of their social system. They are able to integrate violence, social and public communal violence, which of course has its private dimensions, into a life scheme. The people here are very skilled at human relations, personal, familial, village, and intra-village, and at art, particularly performance, including display, dance, and music. These things have developed over many generations in isolation. These things are, or until recently were, highly developed, complicated, and functional. So I felt then, what I've just read. All right. Now let me just see where I am here. Yes. All right. So I also began to do some work at this time with going way back in time. So this goes back about 40,000 years. And I've started to think about what are the origins of performance? How is performance coexistent with the human condition? What's very intriguing about these pictures is that this picture, these handprints, and these handprints, they're obviously similar, right? This is in Sulawesi, that's Indonesia. That's the island of Borneo. This is in northwestern Spain. They are at the same time, they're carbon dated. So it's been said, well, Europe originated all this. Of course, we have a lot of those great caves in Spain and France. That's true. We'll probably uncover other caves in other parts of the world. They're uncovering more now in Southeast Asia as we get to go there more and look. But so what do these handprints signify? You know, what do they signify? Give me a hand. Are they a kind of high five to the world? Are they a mark, I was here? Are they simply the delight of being able to leave a mark? You know how they're made. These negative handprints are made by putting the hand, you have pigment in your mouth with a straw, you know, plant, and you blow through. And so that you have the negatives. There are some positive handprints, but more the negatives. So I began to develop this idea of hand stencils, and in my new edition of my textbook, I have a whole chapter called Performing the Paleolithic, because we also have this, mammoth ivory left, bird bone flutes from Gesenkloster cave in Germany 40,000 years ago. They've made replicas of these. They don't want to play these because they don't want to ruin them, but they've made replicas. They make pretty nice sounds. You can really play a flute, and you have to hand thing. That's 40,000 years ago. We're talking about the Greek theater of 2,500 years ago. So this is 38,500 years before the Greek theater. Now, this doesn't prove an origin. This proves there is no origin. This proves restoration of behavior for the second to the nth time. Something like this didn't just jump out like that, right? There must have been developments for it. It has its own evolution. So we don't have anything earlier than 40,000 before present, but there is something, there must have been experiments, et cetera, to make this kind of thing. And where there's music, there's always dance. Now, I didn't put the photograph out here, but in the caves, we have pictures of footprints that have been preserved in the clay of both adults and children moving in a circular pattern. Now, the caves preserve what's preserved. What was not preserved, what was going on outside the caves in terms of ceremonies and so on, didn't leave this kind of record. So it's not like only things were going on in the caves. The caves were what's left, but that doesn't mean that's all that was there. All right, now, this is Chauvet Cave, France. If you've seen Cave of Forgotten Dreams by, what's his name? Werner Herzog. It's about the Chauvet Cave. So this is a stone, and on it is a skull of a bear. This is really there in Chauvet, and the cave had a skull on it. I mean, and so my friend Jean-Pierre Montel says, Chauvet Cave, France, a large open space with a cave bear skull on top of a stone, quote, altar, as they were when the cave was discovered in 1994. Jean-Pierre Montel believes that the public phase of initiation rites were performed in this chamber. He likens the arrangement of the space to that of the ancient Greek theater, an amphitheater for spectators, a scena, a stage for actors, and an altar at the center. Who knows? That's a kind of Greco-centered thing, but something was going on in these spaces. Altamira, Lascaux, Chauvet, and they weren't art galleries. Let's put it that way. There was something else that was going on, and it was, in my view, performance. Okay, so now, to get back to my life a little bit. So these things started to affect me at the same time in the 60s and 70s as I was deeply involved in the freedom movement. I mentioned that before. And that also affected my theatrical work and my theoretical work, because the freedom movement took place in the streets. We did what is called demonstrations. And what is a demonstration? It's exactly like performance studies. Being, doing, showing, doing. To demonstrate something is to show you're doing. So when we went in, because I was with the first group arrested for sit-in in New Orleans, when we went into the Maison Blanche, appropriately named White House, and sat down at the lunch counter and asked for a cup of coffee, it wasn't so much we were thinking we were going to get coffee. We weren't there to get coffee. I mean, of course, if they served us coffee, that would have brought down the segregationist structure. It would have broken it at a certain point. But they wouldn't get us coffee. And we knew we would get arrested. And we knew it would be in the headlines. Tulane professor and 3 young men arrested in Maison Blanche for a sit-in. So, this also deeply affected me as a kind of performance, and it affected me in developing the theory that had to take into account these kind of things. And where I had been educated up until that point, I mean, earlier through my undergraduate and graduate, that performance only took place on stage. Sometimes people would admit sports into it, but it also took place in arenas and so on. Not the performances of everyday life, and certainly not these demonstration performances. So then I was involved in founding the Free Southern Theater, called Theater for Those Who Have No Theater. If I were to do the motto again, I would say that's not true. We should not use that motto. That was a mistake back in 1963, because there was plenty of theater in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, where we were touring. But it was in churches, it was singing, it was in clubs, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, what we did there with the Free Southern Theater were plays of a different kind. We did Waiting for Godot, which people said, you can't bring Waiting for Godot to poor black communities in rural Mississippi. And what do they know about that? But they did. They knew what Waiting was about. They knew who Pozzo was, and that Lucky was kind of driven crazy by his servitude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we did Pearly Victorious, which I directed, which is a kind of send-up of Southern black, segregationist life. And we also did a documentary in White America. In New York, when I moved there a few years later, I did anti-war plays. I did the first, while I was in New Orleans, I did the first teach-in against the Vietnam War. And then in New York, I did guerrilla theater. So this was called Kill Viet Cong. So here, some of the actors, this was during the time of Dionysus in 68 and 67. We put on a costume that looked like a Vietnamese, and we offered a gun, and there was a famous picture of a South Vietnamese general shooting through the temple a North Vietnamese. So we said, kill Viet Cong. They were the North Vietnamese. So we went around the streets of New York and offered pistols to spectators so they could kill their own Vietnamese person. And to enact the horror of that. And so here you see the hand of a spectator aiming at a Vietnamese, one of us, a Vietnamese, and the spectators. And then you hand out, of course, you hand out leaflets, whatever it is, against that war. I was, just as a footnote, I was also against the war in Iraq. That was right. All right, now I'm going to turn to a whole other time. This is the make-believe part. So now this is India, and this is called the Ram Lila of Ramnagar. Again, I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but do any of you know the Ramayana, or sometimes pronounced the Ramayana? And it's the story of Rama, who is an incarnation of Vishnu, who comes to the world to rid the world of a demon called Ravan. In Varanasi, it's also called Benares, it's a city in Upper India, in Hindi-speaking India. They perform a 31-day play. It's the most stupendous theatrical play I've ever seen. Every day, for 6 hours a day, they tell another episode of this story, and they move all around this town of Ramnagar, means town of Ram, and each day the performance takes place in a different place. But it's not like we congregate in a different place. We congregate the same place as the day before, and part of the play is the move to the new location. And the locations are different places in India. So we start in Ayodhya, which is where Ram was born, and then we go to Chitrakoot, where he goes into exile, and then finally we go to the island of Lanka, which is now Sri Lanka, off the southeast coast. But for the 31 days of the performance, the spectators absolutely believe, many of them, not all of them, many of them believe that this is actually happening. It's kind of the same dimension as the Eucharist in the Catholic Church, except that I think that I've seen many, many more people at this play deeply believing that these are the gods. So This is Rama, and this is his wife Sita, and this is his brother Lakshman. They're all played by young boys before their voices change. So when they do their dialogue, it's up like this. But they're speaking to audiences that range from 5,000 to 80,000 on the big nights. I'll show you some pictures of that. And this is the camphor flame being, so they are being worshipped now as if they are what is called murtis, temple statues. And the people come and they touch their feet. I want to read a little bit from my Ram Leela notebook. I know I'm running out of time, right? It's terrible. All right, well, anyway, 8:30, I'll finish. But so near to Ram and a group of sadhus, they're holy people. This is 1978, this notebook. The 150, all right, so let me just see. Let me get to the end. All right. After Arti, so this is the ceremony called Arti. As I'm about to go back, I decide to stay and see how Ram and Sita get back to the shore. This particular thing I'm writing about, they're taken out on a boat. After most of the crowd is gone, 15 minutes or so, the boat is drawn to the shore. A rope is tied to the boat, so it is simply pulled in. Ram and Sita are helped out of the boat and onto the steps that descend down to the pool. The ghat, then Ram's crown is removed. So they take this off of him, and he sits. Then the crown is put back on. He gets on the shoulders of one of the men, and they are carried down the street. I follow them. People reach out to touch their feet. I touch Ram's foot. I know he can't see my face. I'm behind him, and touch the foot tucked under the legs of the man carrying him. In a few seconds, I also touch Sita's foot. I touch the foot that bring the right hand that touched it to my forehead. I don't know why I do this, something more than doing what the others do and experiencing what I am studying, and something less than devotion to Ram and Sita. Now, in my Performed Imaginaries book, there's a long essay on this performance, and I was very much drawn into it. Now, it's said if you're an anthropologist, you shouldn't, quote, go native. You should be a participant observer, but you should maintain a certain distance. Well, I guess I went native in a big way because I underwent initiation as a Hindu and became Jaya Ganesh. So I'm a Jindu, I'm a Jewish Hindu, and the Hindus tend to accept this side of me. I have many friends in India who say it's quite all right to be Jewish and Hindu. Most of my Jewish friends say it's all right, and I perform yoga, and I have a mantra. And as I say, my name is Ganesh, which is the elephant-headed god. I used to have a bigger pot belly. I was more Ganesh-like. But the point I'm making is that I deeply involved myself in this performance I was studying. At the same time, because remember I was talking when I began about moving in and out, there are times when I move very far away and do a critical analysis of that which at other times I believe. I find it not so much different than domestic life. In other words, I'm in love with my wife, and sometimes we fight. Sometimes I do a critical analysis of her behavior, and she sure does a critical analysis of mine. But that does not mean that we're not literally intimate at other times. So I guess part of my underlying theme is don't think that it's one rule for all time and all circumstances. It's how you apply the rules and the methods of performance studies are like a clothing or a recipe or something that needs to be flexible, not like a rigidity. It is not geometry. It's more like quantum physics, which is also quite speculative when it gets way out there. All right. So now, this is a sadhu. I talk about sadhus. This is Sweat. He's dancing so energetically. He's doing Sweat, and he's singing Sita Ram, Jai, Sita Ram, Jai. Hey, Sita. It's kind of like Howdy, but it goes on and on and on and on for a long time. So the performance is going on, And then when there's a break in the performance always has two parts. Starts around 4:30 in the afternoon, goes to around 6. Some people go for their evening prayers, and then these sadhus, who are holy persons dedicated to Ram and Sita, they sing and dance for 2 hours. Then at around 8 o'clock, the performance begins again till 10. On several nights, it goes all night. Then the Maharaja attends all the performances. And some of these sadhus are honored by sitting to the right hand of the Maharaja. So a naked sadhu next to the king of the place. And that is also really interesting in relationship to Victor Turner's notions of communitas and the leveling that happens within the ritual world, where the high are brought low and the low are brought high. So during this period of time, this Maharaja, he sometimes worships. Here's his son. This Maharaja, Vibhuti Narayan Singh, died about 10 years ago. I was very close to him. This is his son, the new Maharaja, and he's doing that camphor flame. Here are the Swarups, the boys, the gods, and he is worshiping him. So the king is worshiping these boys, who earlier he selected to play these roles. So in July, they audition for him and he selects them. Then during September and October, he worships them. And then at the end of October, they come to see him again and he pays them. So he goes back and forth because he's not pretending to worship them. He really is worshiping them. And he really did hire them. And he's their subject and so on. You know, I'm thinking of the origin of the tradition of the bow in theater. Why do we bow in theater? Why do people bow at the end? Any ideas? And why do they clap? Any ideas? All right, bowing is very simple. During the play, I'm a king. And the real king is out there watching me play the king or a duke. At the end, I'm acknowledging, no, I'm not a king. I'm an actor. You're the king. Now, we've bourgeoisified it. We're all kings, and we do that, but it's the same thing. Clapping is also interesting. In medieval times, you clap to get rid of ghosts, scare them. Characters on stage are like ghosts. They're figures that are brought into existence that can be demonized. So you clap to get rid of them. Of course, we clap to appreciate, but it also restores a different kind of order. So that's kind of the ritual process. So if we look at some of these ordinary habits or ingrained habits, we find secondary meanings. That doesn't mean that this doesn't mean, yeah, I'm happy. Of course it does. And we're not bringing ghosts away. But who are we applauding? See, it's very deep. We're not applauding the character. We're applauding the actor who played the character. So indeed, we're saying, ghost, go away, and thank you, actor. Right? Just like we're saying, king, I acknowledge you, even though, you know, we're business people now. And now, here's the Maharaja going out in procession. This is all his palace. And here he is on an elephant, and there are people. And when you, I'll get to that in a minute. So he's going to go out to the cremation of the demon. So I was talking, who was I talking to about going to Burning Man? Where are you? There we go. And so they have a Burning Man too. So when they cremate the demon, they burn him. Of course, cremation is done in Hinduism, but it's a spectacular scene. You can see the size of the person. This is about 40 or 50 feet up. And at the end of near the end of the play, they cremate the demon, and he is returned into the bosom of Ram. All right, so this all makes this situation theoretically of the social drama, the aesthetic drama. So that what happens on stage, theatrical techniques and the social and political action underlie them. This is something that I got worked out with Victor Turner, and I'll say a little bit more about it after I explain this slide. So in the Ram Leela, you've just seen the social and political action is that these are, that's a king out there, and these are the enactment of religious practices, which are deeply believed, but they're using theatrical techniques. So in aesthetic drama, the social and political action underlies the staging. That's what Aristotle means when he says mimesis. It imitates action. But in the social drama, what happens in the world, a certain kind of theater underlies what goes on in the world. The visible part in a social drama, what's consequential we see, and the kind of staging we don't. In aesthetic drama, we see the staging, but what it explains is hidden. Now, I don't know if you've studied Victor Turner, who is very important in my life, and I met Victor in the mid-1970s. I had known his work earlier. He had written a very important book called Ritual Process in 1968. And then he wrote another book, Dramas, Fields, and Metaphors, in the early 70s, I think about 74. In between those two books, I met him. Actually, he phoned me one day because he had been reading something I had written. And I, of course, had been reading him, but I didn't phone him. And he was in New York. He wanted to meet, and we just hit it off. So we worked together from that time, from 1974-75 until he passed away in 1983, about 10 years. And we did a series of conferences. And he developed his theory of social drama, and I was developing this theory of the relationship between social drama and aesthetic drama. And in Turner's terms, social drama is a four-phase process: breach, crisis, redressive action, reintegration, or schism. To put it in very clearly and compactly, if we use Romeo and Juliet, let's assume that Romeo and Juliet is not a play, but a real social situation. So the breach is the amnesty, enmity between the Montagues and the Capulets. A breach is something that disrupts the social world. Let's say right now the United States and China fighting over trade or something of this sort. But in Romeo and Juliet, it's the enmity between the two families. The crisis is what engages the breach and puts it into some kind of theatrical or social action. In Romeo and Juliet, it's when when Romeo sees Juliet, and they see each other, they fall in love. So that immediately engages this enmity, what's going to happen. The redressive action is everything that is done to resolve the crisis. Now, if we go back to the social drama of China and the United States, the breach is the rise of China to challenge the United States as who's the number one honcho in the world. The crisis is the tariffs, the trade war, right? That engages it. The redressive action we're in the middle of. We don't know how it's going to work out. In Romeo and Juliet, it works out, that they elope, they get married, there's the confusion, he dies, she dies, rather she dies, he dies, she wakes up and dies a second time, all of that is redressive action. And then at Romeo and Juliet, there's the reintegration, not schism. The two families get together, the Duke says this will never happen again, he eliminates the feud, so it's a, quote, happy ending. If you go to King Lear, it's not such a happy ending. In King Lear, when Lear dies and Cordelia and then Lear die, everything is kind of destroyed. And so it's a schism, the country's in ruin. We don't know what's going to happen between the United States and China. So what Turner said is that you can understand social process through this understanding of social drama. So we worked on that a lot too. The other important idea of Turner's, two other important ideas of Turner's that were very important in the development of performance studies is the idea of communitas and the idea of liminality. Again, communitas is the feeling we get of community. Sometimes it's ideological, as in the Catholic Mass. You are a member, you're taking communion, and Turner was a Catholic, so he had that in his mind, and you are part of the body and life of Christ. But that's ideological. You're supposed to believe it. But if you go to a party or a rock concert or something you really believe in, or if you're a deep believer in Catholicism, it becomes spontaneous communitas. You really are drawn into it. What I feel at Ram Leela is spontaneous. It's ideological and spontaneous. But it actually happens to me, and it happens to the people. So Turner modeled out several kinds of communitas: ideological, normative, spontaneous, and so on. They're very important. The idea of liminality is an idea that is so important in performance studies. It's about the social process of stasis, separation, and reintegration. In other words, what happens in an initiation rite. The ideas actually go back to a man named Arnold van Gennep, who was an anthropologist, sociologist about the turn of the 20th century. And Turner picked up on this and developed it into his notion of ritual process, so that in an initiation rite, you begin as one kind of person and you're moved into a liminal phase, which is neither here nor there. So in this room, it's very hard to find something that's really liminal, but if you go into a room that has a lintel, the limen is that space between the two rooms. You're not in this room, you're not in that room. So actually here, I'm kind of in a liminal space. Liminal space always makes people a little uncomfortable. I'm not in the performance space, and I'm not in this space entirely. I'm kind of in between. And you're going to say, shit or get off the pot, fish or cut bait, go one place or the other. At the same time, Turner said that liminal space is extremely creative, because it's when I'm stripped of my old identity and do not yet have a new identity, and I'm in the process of taking on a new identity. A marriage is a very good, a wedding rather, is a very good example of the liminal process. So you're not married, and then you're going to have a wedding ceremony. During that ceremony, you're not married, but you're not married. You're in between, and then there are certain rites that are performed that move you from the position, an identity of being unmarried and single, to being conjoined. You exchange rings, you break glass, you sell whatever, and there is a legal process. You don't need all that ritual rigmarole, but we do need it. We do need it because we're at least if marriage is supposed to work, we're trying to leave behind the identity of oneness and conjoin to the identity of two-ness, and then we move out in a changed being. Now, it's not so much a changed identity, although it may involve that, but a change in the way we have. So we have many, many things in life that are the graduation ceremonies, et cetera. So this notion of liminality was very, very important. But I saw it in the Ram Lila, and I saw it in Papua New Guinea, and I tried to bring it into my theatrical performances by having the audience participate. And when I do workshop, as you know, I make a line on the floor, and I say, when you're on this side of the line, you're in one state. When you're on this side of the line, you're in another state. So this is ordinary life. This is liminality. And here you can change, take on a new name. And those of you who were there, I did all those things. You can have a new name. You can do this. You can be a different gender. You can exchange clothes. And now you're okay again. You're not supposed to gossip about it out here. But that was a workshop in the practice of liminality. And it works, right? I mean, I can see you're nodding your head. You had something happen. Okay. All right, so what happens in this liminal phase is that there are some people who are the masters of the ceremony. They're transported. That's what an actor is. An actor changes, but only temporarily. So at 7 at night, the actor's the actor. From 7:30 to 10:30, they're Hamlet or Othello or whatever. And then they come back, and they're themselves again. They go from A to B to A. And they're skilled at temporary transformation, what I call transportation. They're taken someplace or dropped off. But an initiation person is transformed. You're single, you're in the wedding, you're married. So, and very often, there are two kinds of performers that go together. Transporter-type performances, like the priest or the rabbi, whoever's officiating, the judge, and who is going to be transported, who during the time of the transformation is playing the role of officiant and gives a little advice to the bride and the groom, and does all that stuff, and then afterwards becomes back to herself or himself again. But the people are in a certain sense, hit by a printing press, printed, and they are changed. So these are ideas that without my theatrical experience, without my fieldwork experience, I wouldn't have, these ideas which now seem so, in a certain sense, second nature to me and easy to me, wouldn't have occurred. And it was also the meeting with important people like Turner. Another important person, let's see what I have here. Okay, I'll get to this in a minute. So another important person was Irving Goffman. How many of you know who Irving Goffman was? Okay, so Irving Goffman, not all of you, but some of you. Irving Goffman was an anthropologist. He worked in Las Vegas. He worked in Philadelphia. He wrote many important books, none more important than The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And in that book, he defines what performances are in everyday life. And that is still a very, very active idea. The book was published in the United States in 1959. It was actually published in Scotland in 1956 as a monograph, a report, but then it became published in 59. So it's very early, but still very, very current. So if you don't know, especially the chapter called Performances. Okay, so I'm going to take a sip of water, and I'm going to show you a few more pictures. And try to summarize so we can have some time for discussion. So I want to show you a few more of my artistic works from 1967 to the present. So this is back in New Orleans. This is Eugene Ionesco's Victims of Duty. And you can see the audience would sit in all of these places. And the performance would take place here and move up and down these stairs, which went nowhere. This circle of chairs. But so this was my first experimental work in the theater of environmental theater. Prior to that, I had done it because I staged some happenings. I was fortunate enough to know John Cage and Alan Capro, and those people, we kind of hung out together, so et cetera. This is Dionysus in '69. You saw a little film clip of it and this is the birth ritual. So right now, Pentheus is being born between the legs of the women and over the backs of the men. And yes, they're all naked. And for the most part, we did it completely naked, which even today is, if not shocking, a little surprising, because it's not the usual, quote, I don't like the word nude. I mean, I don't mind it if you're talking about some kind of painting style, but I don't like it in relationship to performance. They're naked, not nude. And they're not trying to make a pose or be, quote, beautiful, although it is beautiful. They are doing an action. And they're doing an action of birth. And we're born naked. So there's no other way. And I mean, for me, as a theater director, and yes, you don't have to be totally naked as the person giving birth, but you're certainly exposed. You're more or less naked. So we did it completely naked, and we got the men involved also. It was a beautiful scene, and you see the film. In the film, we're not completely naked all the time, because I made a big mistake when I made that film. I wanted it to be a big hit. It was the part of the days when I really thought I could be a superstar. So I didn't want an X rating. I wanted an R rating. But we got an X rating anyway. So I wasn't a big hit, and they didn't see this in the film. So, but there's a great book about it, so it's there. So here's Dionysus, here's Pentheus, and here are the spectators all around. And the way I played it, it's a version of Euripides the Bacchae, is that Dionysus is very loose, and he's polymorphous, and he likes men, he likes women, he would like puppies, I guess. And Pentheus is very rigid, as you can see. And so the way I built that into the performance was that Pentheus had to stick to the script. He had lines he had to say. But Dionysus could improvise. And it drove the actor playing Pentheus crazy, because he had to say the lines that were written, and the other guy could say, a famous one, he said, hey, Bill, that was the name of the actor. Bill had to say, Dionysus, well, you know, he said, Bill, you know, you are a man, I'm a god, this is a tragedy, the odds are against you. And of course, the audience laughed at this, and the king, you know, he's stuck in this play. So that rigidity is shown. But finally, he gives in to Dionysus. There was a lot of audience participation in it and so on. And here is the death. You can see the blood. And the men are all pulled apart. And it was during the Vietnam era time. So I was bringing with a very effective blood. I used mostly stage blood, but sometimes real blood, animal blood. And I've done some performances with animal blood and with the animals, cows' heads and things, to make a body pile of bloody people like we saw in those days. We're at 8:30. Okay. Well, I'm going as quickly as I can. So this is another scene. So the whole space is used. And all right, now it's Macbeth. So the audience entered Macbeth by going through a maze, and then they came down to this place, and it all took place around Macbeth's dinner table, as it were. This is Commune, same space. This was the history of America as told by Charles Manson, the night he murdered Sharon Tate. And this is the Manson figure, and again, you can see all the spectators. This is Mother Courage, but this is in India, where I brought it. And this is me at that point. You can see it. I still have this medal. I brought it here. And there's another part. We saw some pictures of that. This is Oedipus, Seneca's Oedipus, and Yocasta's always pregnant because she does. She has 4 children late in life because she meets Oedipus when he must be at least 17 or 18. So she must be at least 34 or 35, which in those days would be quite. And she has Ismene, Antigone, Polynikes, Teocles. So she's very busy. So I cast her as always being pregnant. But then my personal life was involved because I was married to Joan McIntosh at that point, and we cast her body when our son was in her 8 months pregnant. And then after she gave birth, she played the role. He's doing very well. He's in Paris. He's 47 years old, and he's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Okay, and this is imagining. Oh, you saw some of it. This is near the end where they're dying. All right, so this is a very important model that I got also. So drama, script, theater, performance. In other words, the drama is the smallest intense thing. That's the story that that moves from place to place, a written drama. A script is everything that can be transmitted from time to time, place to place. The theater is what's enacted by a specific group of performers at a specific time. And performance is the widest. It includes the spectators, the technical people, the box office, the management. So I developed my theories taking all those into account. And again, had I not made these field trips, had I not seen what goes on in other cultures, I would not have been able to devise that. All right, I'm not going to go into restoration of behavior. This is the model for it. It's my last slide. It's very, very, it's not that complicated, but since we're at 8:30, if I went on and to explain restoration of behavior, I just want to read one thing about restoration of behavior, which is about how it's been just scientifically, restoration behavior says that the future creates the past, not the past creates the future. It says because of the project we want to bring into existence, we rehearse or do something today, and which we did yesterday. So the future project gives us the means to select from what we did yesterday, all this kind of categorical yesterday, what we're going to do today. And so this is from just very recently. Every mental activity, this is a neurologist, involves anticipating what will happen, verifying a hypothesis against sensory data, and then guessing again. Seeing or hearing are not passive data receiving processes. They are always coupled with predictions. Even the most mundane tasks, finding and preparing food, going through a door without banging one's head, driving a car, require an ability to process incoming data, predict changes in the immediate environment, and know what happened before. So it's a kind of, if I went on with this, it's a kind of validation through neurological studies and what brain is of the restoration of behavior notion. And again, that idea of thinking of action as a package, future, past, present, rather than past, present, future, as the dynamic of what we really experience. I could say more. I hope I've given you some sense of how this goes. I can only say that my own experiences, let's see if I have a concluding paragraph, I probably do. My experiences have really conditioned what I do. All right, here it is. I just read this and then I'm finished. How did the artistic work intersect the theories and the development of the NYU Performance Studies Department? I left out a whole section about who formed that department, how it was formed. It was basically me in collaboration with 3 or 4 others, and then it developed over time from the early 70s through the decade of the 70s and formalized itself in 80. That's another story. I could tell it, but so, and that's the institutional story which meshes with this story. All right, first, in working with colleagues whose most passionate personal scholarly work was what was wanted in the department. As Turner once said, chaps, not maps. That is, make a department of people who deeply believe in what they are doing and who get along with each other. Then in making sure the department was broad spectrum, what I first showed you, the very first slide, ranging from the performing arts, theater and dance especially, and music, to experimental performance, anthropology. Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett, who was the first chair of performance studies, is an anthropologist. Area studies and the performative aspects of cultural studies. The same kinds of overlaps, intersections, and interculturality that was driving the artistic work, my artistic work, infused the department. And just as the Worcester group emerged as part of and then separate from the performance group, Elizabeth Lecomte was my assistant director for several productions. I directed her in several productions. So performance studies at NYU emerged from what Brooks McNamara, who was an expert in popular entertainments, Michael Kirby, who did Happenings, and I introduced, that Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett and Diana Taylor, who heads the Hemispheric Institute, expanded, and other colleagues such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's now in California, Peggy Phelan, who's also in California, and Jose Munoz, who is sadly deceased, developed in queer theory, critical race studies, hemispheric and global studies, and more. And so that's the story in a nutshell. Thank you. Here, could somebody take this away, because we're supposed to sit over there. Thank you. Just put it way over there. Thank you very much. I'm just getting some water.
Okay, so we only have a short amount of time for questions, so I guess I have this thing that I can throw around to you all, and I'm going to attempt to do it. So is there a question that anyone has? Yes, sir. Speak into that microphone there.
Oh.
It'll capture your voice.
Test, test, is it on? So you mentioned a lot about your work with Hamlet and Agamemnon and such. Very often you worked with European or Western productions. Were there other examples of, say, Eastern or not necessarily European productions?
Yeah, well, I did. Tomorrow He'll Be Out of the Mountains, which is a play written in Chinese, in Mandarin. But it was a Western-style play. It was what's called Waju, spoken drama. So my own artistic work has been with European or American texts, aside from that play.
Yeah, I'll throw it up. Ready?
Good throw, Zachary.
Not bad.
Let's sign him up.
Touchdown, Dr. Price. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Schechner, for coming out to Texas A&M, and we had a lot of fun and learned a lot at your workshop that you hosted for us on Tuesday. But I wanted to ask you kind of a specific question. Tell me about your work in relationship with director Brian De Palma. He's one of my most favorite directors, and of course his film Carrie is very just out there and stuff. And
Carrie, that hand in Carrie comes from Dionysus, the bloody hand. Well, Brian De Palma was not Brian De Palma, and Richard Schechner was not quite Richard Schechner when we worked together, right? We're talking about 1968. So I met Brian through William Finley, who played Dionysus. And William Finley had been in one or two of Brian's early movies, Hi Mom and greetings,
Uh-huh.
and knew. So at the end of the run of Dionysus in July 1969, I said, I'd like to make a film of this. And Finley says, well, I know a filmmaker, maybe he'd be interested. I've been working with him, Brian De Palma. So I met with him, we hit it off, and he came to see the play, and he said, yes, he'll make a film. And then we shot it on the very last night of the performance, and when it got, and it was in available light, and when it got finished, I said, well, how did it go? He said, I think it went well, but of course, these are the days of celluloid, this is not digital. I have no idea, because it'll take a few weeks to develop it. We should shoot it again, just to make sure. He was using 2 cameras to start with. We shoot it a second time. I said, but the play is closed. That was the last night. He said, well, you know, you got to do it again. So then Finley, I think, was teaching at Sarah Lawrence College. We called them and we said, we'll do a special performance in the same space, Performing Garage. We couldn't open again. And anybody who wants to come from the college can come for free, and we'll turn on all the lights. There will be no theatrical light. We'll turn on every light we had to make sure, because he was worried it was too dark. Mm-hmm. And he shot it again. And it turned out all right. But if you look at the film carefully, you'll see some frames are dark, some frames are light. That you'll see sometimes the room is very crowded, and sometimes it's not. It was my idea to put the double screen, because so much was happening. A normal film, absolutely makes a proscenium effect. You're looking through a fourth wall. But at least the double screen, which he used, the double camera, most of it is in double camera, about 20% is not, 80% is, gives the sense of the simultaneity of the action. And the audience participation was very, very good. And that came out well from the actual performance, not the special performance. As I say, I regret that we weren't performing naked. What we did with the naked performance is we mostly performed naked, but when we felt it got too dangerous for the actors, because some guys would come and grope them, and it was nasty. At that point, when I said, whenever it gets bad, we'll perform it dressed, and then the word will get around they're not naked anymore, and these creeps won't come to the show, because that was a bad aspect of it. There's a book that I did with a complete script and all its variations and all of the notes and comments. And I also rotated the cast. So in the film, you're seeing particular people play particular roles, and they did originate the roles. But during the run of the play, almost everybody in the group played every role. We rotated it around. And I tend to do that. And this is another thing that comes from my anthropological work, I tend to form a community that makes the work. I don't cast plays. I form communities that make work. So I'm working on a piece now based on Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novel, James Joyce's Ulysses, the final soliloquy of Molly Bloom, and Roger Casement, who was an Irish patriot but also executed as a traitor by the British, his diaries about Africa and the Putumayo, which is the Amazon, and the personal lives of the people I'm working with. That's what I do. I always get involved with your personal life. I'm interested in your personal life. So although I saw a very, very beautiful costume shop, and I appreciate it this afternoon, I don't work usually with a costumer. The performers are the costume. So I work with clothes rather than costumes. But people have in their wardrobe, you'll be surprised, spectacular things. So what we do is say, okay, we'll buy it. You can get a second pair because it gets worn out. And it's not exactly true. I do usually have a costume or two, but we don't construct costumes so much as obtain costumes, because I like to have clothes that are worn. I love having second-hand clothes, because almost always when you're doing a performance, the characters didn't arrive in new clothes, so etc. But it's the same for the environment. I mean, I like to work a lot with found space, and I found that out in my theatrical, my anthropological field work, and I also found it out doing happenings and found space happening, site-specific work. I mean, now these things have these kind of words, but back 40 or 50 years ago, they were doing some of the stuff like that, but they didn't have the same terminology. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
it does. It does. That's really, really awesome and very, very cool. Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
We're just about out of time, and we do want to do this signing. So can I ask that you take your questions out to the lobby, and we'll have some books available. Okay? But thank you all so much for coming, and thank you again. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Richard Schechner.
How was it?